Welcome to the Know Your Ancestors podcast. I am Megan Hillier. I'm a professional genealogist and host of the podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about how to spot trauma and resilience in your ancestors' lives. Like, how do you spot those signs of trauma and resilience? Now, first of all, if you've listened to other podcast episodes, you know that genealogy is so much more than names and dates. I know a lot of people, when I tell them what I do, they kind of get a blank look like, that's kind of boring. Like, why would you want to do this? Why would you want to learn the names and information about people that lived hundreds of years ago? Well, we know that genealogy helps us understand who our ancestors were, and we descend from this, right? We descend from them. We inherit a lot of their pain, their trauma, but also their resilience and joy. So records give us clues about what our ancestors lived through, their trauma, their resilience, their patterns. And when we slow down and look closely, we start seeing how their experiences show up in us. So today we're going to talk about what to look for and then how to actually find these clues in the records that you already have or that you need to look for. So first of all, why does this even matter? Well, if you know about epigenetics, about generational inheritance, we are finding scientifically even the evidence that the trauma, the events that go on in your ancestors' life before your line is conceived affects them genetically, that things are passed down. So those patterns can show up. You can see families that struggle with addiction, families that have lived through horrible things like wars, famine, enslavement, indigenous culture here where I live in Canada. Like, there's a lot of pain and trauma and things that you can see the effects of. And everyone has those things. We all are a result of those people that we come from. And so when we learn about their lives, that we can better understand ourselves, we can better understand our family members, we can give grace to those people in our family lines once we know a bit more about what happened to them. Now, I'm not going to talk a ton about that, but just know that just because horrible things happened to one of your ancestors, that doesn't mean that your life is doomed and that, you're just going to suffer. We know that through epigenetics, things can change, healing can happen, and patterns can be reversed. And so there is hope, but there's also an understanding that, yes, things can be passed on, and having an understanding of that can help heal, can help us move forward, can help us recognize what our ancestors went through. So first of all, we're going to talk about signs of trauma. So when I do work with clients, when I am doing my new offering, which I have just changed the name from Ancestral Analysis to Your Origin Story, because it's much more of that than an analysis of your ancestors. When I do that, I look for signs of trauma and resilience. And I'm going to share what those things might be, and then I'll talk about how we can actually look for those things. So first of all, signs of trauma. What things could you watch for? Well, family structure disruptions. So was there divorce? Was there separation? Was there abandonment? Is there children living with other households or other places? We can look for shifts in census records when you notice a family with children in one census record, and then 10 years later, there's some disruption there. You can think something has happened, right? You can look for marriage records or divorce records. You can look for newspaper records. Quite often, those will list a notice of a divorce. And we can also look for early death and loss. Okay, was there death of children, spouses, siblings? Looking at the cause of death, timelines, patterns, newspapers often provide a little more information, or if you can find a death record that provides the cause of death, that can give some more information as well. You can also see signs of poverty or economic stress, occupation changes, frequent moves. 1940 census is especially helpful. This was just after the Depression, so the U.S. government wanted to know how people were doing, what their occupation was, how much money they had earned, and that sort of thing. You can also look for information that show signs of abuse or neglect or unsafe homes. Maybe there's divorce records that have citing cruelty, guardianship records for children, maybe arrests or court cases and newspaper records, and also historical trauma. So a lot of times we might not have records that, say this is what happened to our ancestors. But a lot of things that were happening historically can help us know that our ancestors' lives were affected by that, or likely were. Some of those things would be enslavement for Black ancestors before 1865, or even after that, racism, segregation, displacement, and then for world wars, famine, epidemics, forced migration. There could be military records, pension files, all that sort of thing that shows our ancestors' involvement in these historical events. But also just knowing historically what was happening where your ancestor lived can help you understand maybe some of those signs of trauma. There's also some somewhat hidden or the silent trauma. A lot of mental health was not understood even just 50, 100 years ago. So your ancestor may have lived in an institution. Maybe that's where they died. So you can see that they were in a mental institution. There was probably some sort of trauma that put them in there, or just a misunderstanding of what was going on with them. Okay, again, court cases, divorces, signs of children being orphaned, separated siblings, that sort of thing. You can see that there's things going on. Often newspaper articles will provide information about that as well. Okay, so as you can see, there's a lot of things that can cause trauma, right? We ourselves, we have lives and lots of things happening. A lot of those things aren't going to be recorded, right? We don't record those personal, intimate, maybe traumatic things that happen. But a lot of these records can give clues that there was some sort of trauma or trial or hard thing happening in your ancestors' lives. But our ancestors also lived full, joyful, wise lives. And we can learn from that as well. We have inherited that as well. So I don't want us to just dwell on the trauma, the hard. There is a lot of resilience that they have passed on as well. So we can see signs of resilience. Maybe that's a remarriage after loss. Maybe that's single parenting and supporting your family. Maybe that's seeing long-term stability through ongoing residence in the same location. Maybe that's seeing signs of volunteering or serving in their church or clubs or charity work that we can find in newspapers. Quite often, you can see your ancestors' involvement in different community organizations. Maybe we can see family bonds, ties with their family that are strong. They're living with other family members or taking care of other family members, or maybe they just live nearby their family. Now, we don't know for sure that those were good relationships, but the fact that they're living nearby shows that they likely had relationships and support. Can also see their education or skills, what their occupations were. That can give us insights into that. Also, entrepreneurship. Did they own a business? That can show some, abilities to do that sort of thing. It's not an easy thing to be an entrepreneur. So you can see maybe ads in newspapers for their business or running a farm. That sort of thing takes a lot of wisdom and knowledge and ability. You can also see faith and community support. Were they involved in their church? Did they serve other people around them? That sort of thing. Okay, so you can see that there's a lot of signs for both trauma and resilience, and it's not necessarily correct, right? That's why I say it's signs of trauma and resilience. We don't know how they metabolized what happened to them. We don't know how that event affected them, okay? So we don't want to just assume that this was a huge traumatic thing for them that they had to go through and that pain has been passed down. We don't know, right? But these are signs that we can explore, that we can help understand, that we can maybe see patterns that can help us understand ourselves and those ancestors. Okay, so now how do we actually do this? How do we practically look for these clues in the lives of our ancestors? Well, you will need to have a bit of an understanding about how to do genealogy, how to do research, which I do have an online course that I'll talk about at the end of this. But it is easier than ever now to look for these records. So don't just tune out and assume that you're never going to do this, okay? And if you are never going to do this, you can hire me to do it for you, okay? But how do we practically do this? How do we look for these records that show these signs, okay? So first of all, census records. If you live in the United States or Canada or the UK, there's census records every 10 years. There's probably census records in other countries as well. Well, I know there is, but I'm not as familiar with those. But I can confidently say from 1850 to 1950 in the United States, there's a census record, except for 1890. But And so you can see a lot of clues from census records alone. You can see who is living in the household with them. You can see in some of the census records, you can see their income. You can see their occupation. You can see where they lived. You can see, if they own their own home, and with their income level, you can see how that compared to their neighbors. You can look up, how much is that in today's money, how that compares. You can also see household changes. Like I said before, if there's 5 children in one census and then there's only 2 in the next one, why aren't those children there? Did they become adults and move out, or was there some loss there? Okay, so census records are really helpful in pulling out some of those signs of possible trauma. Okay, the next one that's really helpful, that it's kind of a hit and miss thing. Sometimes we'll find it, and sometimes, well, a lot of the time we won't. But that is newspaper records. Papers, back in the day, that was like their social media. They put all the nosy information that people wanted to know. If people had family visiting, or if they left somewhere to go visit family, or if, someone got arrested. I mean, we still have that on the news now. But just seemed a little more personal in the newspapers back then, especially if you have a small local newspaper. And so you can look in newspapers. I love using newspapers.com. There's a lot of free newspapers available online. You would just need to find out where your ancestor lived, then look up online where those archives are kept. When you're searching newspapers, it's not an easy thing all the time. So you need to use variations, put them in quotation marks. So it's just looking for that single name, try lots of different variations, and then keep it to the location where they lived. But also there'll be newspaper records. Sometimes if someone moved away, sometimes there'll be newspaper records in their hometown. So you got to keep an eye out for that. But in newspaper records, first of all, obituaries are super helpful. It can tell you if they were still married at the time of their death, the names of their children, if those children died early. A lot of times it will have that in there as well. So obituaries are super helpful. But then there's also just other events that happened in your ancestors' lives. Maybe there's an accident. Like I found for a client, I forget which ancestor it was, but they almost got hit by a train. Their car stalled on the train tracks and they had to push it out of the way and narrowly miss being hit by a train. So things like that come out and, give us a clue. Like, how did that affect them? What would that have been like to almost get hit by a train? I don't know. But these information in newspaper articles can provide a lot more information. A lot of times I find divorce notices, okay? And that's the only place that I've been able to find that. Court records are not always easy to locate. A lot of times you have to go to the actual courthouse or the county records office to get that information. It's not always easy. But newspapers, they'll have a little notice that says so-and-so versus so-and-so divorced. Sometimes they'll even provide for reasons of adultery or cruelty or things like that. Then also just social columns. I was doing some research for someone that their ancestor was, kind of in the upper class of their neighborhood. So they would talk about her, going to tea and what she wore and what her wedding was like, the decor and the flowers that they had, that sort of thing. Like there's a lot of cool information in there like that. Maybe they served on community boards or in government fields. That information can be on newspaper records as well. Now, also, newspapers can reveal accidents, okay? There was one I'm working on right now for a client. I found that I think it was his great-grandmother's brother died when he was 20. So that can be a sign. You're like, what happened? Like people that are 20 don't just die from natural causes very often, right? So I really wanted to find out how he died. Well, the death record didn't have any information. I don't even know if there was a death record, but I looked in the newspaper and sure enough, the newspaper article provided some information about his death. His body was found out in the desert, I believe, and it said that there was signs that it was a suicide, so that he died by suicide. So these are things that likely wouldn't be mentioned anywhere else. If there was a death record, it probably would have been on there, but there wasn't one. So newspapers can help to really fill in some of those gaps. So we've looked for census and newspapers. Now, obviously, vital records are where you also want to look and see if you can locate those. Now, quite often, those didn't start being kept until about 1900. So if you had ancestors before that, you're not going to find like a government birth record for them, right? But there might be church records or that sort of thing if they were a member of a church or even if they weren't. Sometimes there'll be a baptism record or marriage records or burial records for church records. But vital records can give a lot of clues. So birth records, we can see when they were born. Sometimes when they were born versus when their parents were married, you can see that they were pregnant at the time that they were married. How would that have affected them, right? Those sort of things can help us understand a bit of that relationship. And we can also see cause of death on death records. That can be helpful. And then also just looking for missing children. A lot of times there are children born between and died between census records. So maybe we don't even have that child, but we see that there's like a 5 or 6 year gap between two children. So really looking for death records, maybe using the surname and a wider range of years to see if we can catch any of those birth or death records for missing children. We can also just follow where they moved. So see where they moved year by year to see how stable or what opportunities they were following or that sort of thing. So I have an ancestor that he was an entrepreneur. He came out from New Brunswick to Calgary, Alberta, right when Calgary was becoming a city. Well, it was Fort Calgary when he came here. And he opened the first, well, maybe not the first, but one of the first general stores in Calgary. And we have a census of him up in the Yukon because of the gold rush. So you can see that he must have been doing well enough to be able to leave there, go up to the Yukon in hopes of gold. Maybe that was in desperation. I don't know. Well, I know that it wasn't because he was quite well off. But little things like that we can see, why did they go there when they went there? Those kind of clues can give us some ideas. Maybe border crossing records or passenger lists can see the travel that they did and help us understand a bit more about them. And also, like I had said before, a bit about finding gaps or irregularities. So if there's large gaps between children, that can give us a sign that maybe there was a child in between that passed away. Or maybe they had problems with infertility. Maybe there was a lot of miscarriages. Again, we're not going to really find records of that, but that can help maybe give us some clues. Or maybe a spouse vanishes between records. We see them together on one census, and then the next census we see the wife with the children, and maybe she's even still listed as married, or maybe it's a separated or divorced, but that can give us information there. Looking for court records, again, court and probate records, these aren't as easy to locate. They're getting easier with AI, but looking for divorce records, court records about guardianship, maybe wills give a lot of information about relationships within families. Bankruptcies, those sort of records aren't as easy to access, but if you know where to look, you can look for those to get some more clues. But also, I find just historical context, knowing what was going on. If your ancestor lived in Tennessee in 1872, what was going on then at that time? There was probably, some unrest with the recent Civil War and that sort of thing. That can give us some insight into what their life might have been like. Or even looking at where they lived. Did they live on a farm? Did they live in a city? Did they live near people? Did they speak the same language as those that live nearby them, which we can see through census records? Really understanding what their day-to-day life might have been like can really give us an insight into what happened to them. So look for not just the pain, not just the trauma, but also look for the resilience and the grit and the determination that these ancestors had. So hopefully this gave you some ideas of how you can dig deeper into the records that you have about your ancestors. Maybe you're like me and you have a very full, well-researched family tree already, but do you really know who those people are? Take some time to actually learn about them. Look at those records in a different way and see what clues or signs of trauma and resilience you can see in your family. We all know that we have inherited things from our ancestors. So when we understand these things, we can understand ourselves better. And we can give more compassion to not only our ancestors, but to ourselves. So thanks so much for listening to this episode today. I feel like I rattled off a whole bunch of information, but hopefully it was helpful to give you some ideas of what you can look at about for your own ancestors. Okay, so I encourage you to take just a few of these tips from this episode and apply that to one of your ancestors. Choose one of your ancestors that lived not too long ago and see if you can just learn a bit more about them and pull out some of those signs of possible trauma or resilience to help you to better understand them and yourself. Now, I invite you, if you want to learn more about how to actually do this, how to do research, how to build your family tree, and then how to look at the information for your ancestors to get a better understanding about who they were in all aspects of their lives. I am offering, again, a bundle of my 2 online courses, Know Your Family Tree and Know Your Ancestor. And Know Your Family Tree, I teach you the practical steps about how to research, how to build your tree, and how to put all those things together. And then in Know Your Ancestor, I teach you how to take it a step deeper, how to do some of these things that I talked about in this episode to really look at the clues and the signs and the what actually happened to your ancestor, what their life was like. So you can get those 2 online courses together for a special bundle called Rooted and Rising. You can get that for $297, and that sale will go on throughout the rest of this month till the end of November. So if you would like to get that, just click the link in the show notes here or go to knowyourancestors.co/rooted rising. So I hope that you will check that out if you want to learn more how to do this, or if you don't, that's totally fine. Take what you learned from this episode and go do that on your own. And if you're like, this just feels like too much, I can't do this, this takes too much time, which it does take a lot of time, but it's a really fulfilling experience. If you would like me to do this for you, to look at the lives of your ancestors, to understand who they were in a full scope, in the full 4, 5, or 6 generations, look at your family tree. I still have 2 spots for ancestral analysis, which is now changed the name to Your Origin Story. So I still have 2 spots at a discounted rate. 4 generation is discounted to $1,500, normally $2,500, and the discounts just go up from there. So if you would like to talk to me about what's possible, about how you can really understand who your ancestors were, what their lives were like, and do this for each of your ancestors in your family tree in those 4, 5, or 6 generations, you can click the link to set up a 15-minute free chat with me, and we can talk about what's possible. Maybe you're wondering, can you do this for your ancestors based on where they lived? Just book that call, chat with me, and we can see what's possible. Okay, so thanks so much for listening today, and we will see you next week.